Greetings and welcome to this great interview that we're going to have. We're going to be talking to Hal Philipp, and Hal Philipp is one of the great entrepreneurs and inventors, I think, of the 20th century. And we're going to get into that. I would be very surprised if today you haven't used some of the devices and some of the technology which is developed by Hal Philipp. I'm joined in the interview by Bradley Norris. Bradley is the director of the Technical Entrepreneurship program at the Baylor Business School, and he's going to be helping me do the interviewing. So I'd like to introduce you to Hal Philipp. And Hal, I know you love doing stuff like this, right? Are you having fun yet?
Oh, we're having a lot of fun.
You're having a lot of fun here.
Yeah.
What I want to do is just kind of start out from the beginning. You went to Michigan Tech.
I did.
And your brother went with you, didn't he?
No, he was 9 years older. He went earlier.
He went
studied
earlier.
chemistry.
Magnus, right. Yeah. And your brother is a professor? He retired, right?
He's retired now. He's going to be 80 this year. He was the head of the biochem department at City University of New York.
Okay.
For many years.
So after you graduated from Michigan Tech, you went to work for Tektronics, which is one of the big electronics firms. Could you tell us some of the stuff you did when you first started out?
Well, actually, I worked for the National Bureau of Standards before Tektronics.
I didn't know that.
You didn't know that?
No.
Okay.
Okay.
We didn't talk about that. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
So
I worked for
what'd you do
NBS. It's now called NIST.
NIST. Okay.
Yeah.
So what standards were you? You have standards, I guess.
Fusion plasma physics, believe it or not.
Really?
Yeah, I wasn't aware they were doing that kind of stuff, but in the development of fusion reactors, they needed to have calibration data for contamination ions in the plasma, and they were working on that. They had tokamak. They had a theta pinch reactor, and then so I worked on instrumenting that, doing the control systems and data collection.
So how long did you work for NIST?
That was about 3.5 years.
3.5 years, and then you went to Tektronics.
Then I went to Tektronics, yeah.
And at Tektronics, you were. I talked to him before. You were in charge of developing technology for optical time domain reflectometers.
Yeah.
And was that your first patent?
Yeah, I had developed the time base for the world's first OFTDR, optical fiber time base.
Okay, kind of.
Time domain reflectometer, yeah.
Okay, that's easy for you to say, right?
OFTDR.
So could you explain what an optical time domain reflectometer is for the layperson?
Yeah, sure. So a TDR, time domain reflectometer, basically sends out a pulse of energy into some medium. It could be into space. It could be into, in this case, a fiber optic or a piece of wire. Works like a radar. So it looks for the reflections that are coming back. And based on the signal that's coming back, you can determine the attenuation of the fiber. You can determine if there are any breaks or anything special about the fiber, some dispersion characteristics. So that was necessary to lay all the long lines in fiber optics throughout the ensuing years. This was in the late 70s this was developed. And so I worked in the TDR group at Tektronics. They were doing wire TDRs, and they had a mission to do a fiber optic version of that. So that's what I worked on. My contribution was the time base. It was a quasi-digital / analog time base, and I got a patent on that. I also did the control systems based on a Z80.
Okay.
Z80.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now that patent is long since expired. You
yeah.
were a young guy when you did that, right?
Yeah. That was in the 70s.
Okay.
That was a while back.
Okay. Yeah. All in all, I talked to Hal before. He has 98 U.S. patents. 98 U.S. patents. That doesn't include the foreign ones.
That I know of.
That you know of, right?
Yeah.
And
U.S. ones, yeah.
You've lost track of a lot of your patents, right?
I don't monitor them anymore.
You don't monitor them anymore.
I'm out of the game.
So how long did you work for Tektronics?
That was close to 5 years.
5 years, and then you decided to go into consulting business.
Yeah, since I had done a patent, you kind of get a taste of inventing. So my idea was I would go out on my own and develop my own patents and then license them. So that was the basic mission that I set myself onto. And I promptly starved, of course. It was a lot harder than it seemed. And so I ended up consulting back for Tektronics and for other startup companies in the Pacific Northwest. But I did eventually file a patent on something.
On something.
On something.
So I want to clarify.
Sure,
you were starting independent consulting independently on your own.
Yeah, I just quit tech one day and started consulting.
Okay.
But I had a contract for another company that was doing optical fiber work.
Okay.
It was called Photon Kinetics. I think they're still in business today. So I worked for the founder. His name was Phil Shearer, Dr. Shearer, in his garage, literally, and did optical optoelectronic stuff for him.
Okay.
Yeah, that was
and
my
did you
first
ever
contract job.
expand the team and have others join you?
No,
or
I
was
was a lone guy. I was a
All
lone
right.
wolf. Yeah, that was
Okay.
me. So I just enjoyed working on my own. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And he did everything. So tell us about one of your first patents that has to do with, well, in Texas, I was mentioning to us, the number one religion is Christianity. Number two is football. And so the second patent that you had was on football. So what did you do on football?
Well, I was approached by a Texan guy who was a recruiter. He had been a football coach. And his objective was to be able to have some portable gear that he could take with him to high schools to recruit students for football. The objective was to measure athletic performance in terms of agility and speed, both in combination. So he developed a kind of a maze system, or he had this idea for a maze system where the runner would start out at point A and then run down the field, and then there would be a light at the end of the field which would indicate turn left or turn right, and so the person would have to turn right. There'd be another light and turn left again, and it zigzagged down the field and finally end up at the final destination. And for this, I needed to develop an optical sensor that could detect this person running by this particular position, and then some radio technology to control the lights and to measure the timing. And the optical sensor was very critical, of course, had to be very fast, very high speed, and low power because it all had to run on batteries. Everything was set up on tripods, not cables. So that was my first taste of optical sensors. But I'd been working at Tektronics in the optical business anyway, so it wasn't like it was alien to me. But that's where I really started.
That was a football patent.
It was it's based on football.
So what was the idea for the runner, the offensive runner, to be able to look at these lights down the field and tell which way to go?
Well, it's the human reaction time, seeing the lights, not knowing which way the lights are going to go, right? So you get to a certain point, past a certain sensor, and then a light flashes on the right, and they have to turn right real quickly.
Okay.
And some people would turn the wrong way in anticipation. So this is a failure, right? So these guys didn't survive. So you have to really react quickly to the stimulus.
But you couldn't use it in a football game, right?
That's not the point. The
Oh,
point was
okay, I
purely
missed the
recruiting,
point.
just for recruiting.
For recruiting.
It's just recruiting.
Okay.
Measurement of success. Right.
Yeah.
Measurement of
It's a
reaction
quantification
times.
of reaction time and
see.
speed, and
Okay.
speed both. Agility and reaction time and speed.
Okay. So you got a patent on that?
No, actually, not on
you
that
didn't?
one. No,
Because
but that
that
got
was-
me into optical sensors.
Optical sensors.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's when I started thinking about improving that to reduce the power consumption of the sensors, because these sensors consumed a lot of power. They were active infrared, so they sent out pulses of infrared light and looked at the reflection coming back. And to get good response time, you needed to reduce the signal or increase the signal-to-noise ratio, so that implied a lot of power output. And that consumed a lot of battery. And so the objective was to reduce the battery consumption.
Okay.
And that's where I got into the patent on the next technology piece.
Okay. And you and I published a paper on
We
that.
did.
right?
It was called the photon bridge.
The photon bridge.
Yeah.
I remember that. Yeah.
It was based on the idea of darkons.
Darkons. You guys know what a darkon
Photons
is?
versus darkons.
Yeah, darkons are absence of. It's probably like electrons and holes in semiconductors.
Kind of,
isn't it?
yeah.
Okay. So a darkon is the absence of a photon. So there's a lot more darkons than there are photons, I suspect, in the world, right? Okay, so that's interesting. So optical sensors. Tell us about optical sensors and maybe the door opener and the state of the door opener when you started to look at it. And
Yeah, so once I had the patent on the photon bridge sensor, I was looking for other applications. So
First of all, describe the photon bridge.
Yeah, so the basic idea of the photon bridge is to create a linearization of the pin photodiode. So pin photodiodes have nonlinearity. They have a lot of noise issues and kind of a dark response curve at the bottom end. And so you had to have some way to lift the curve up a little bit and also to create a more linear response so that when ambient light changes, it doesn't change the response of the sensor. So the basic idea was to create a summing junction at the pin photodiode. Now, how do you do that? Summing junctions are made of the signal coming in and also a negative signal coming back, some feedback coming back to the diode, or to the summing junction to create a negative or a null response. And so the idea of the photon bridge was, you have the light coming, you have an infrared emitter sending a beam out to the object that you're going to sense. The reflection is coming back, it's very weak. And then it's in pulse form, so the pulses are coming in. Of course, you amplify that, but before you amplify it, you send another set of optical pulses to the pin photodiode. But these pulses have to be in opposition to the pulses coming in. So you have to think of them as darkons. So you want to cancel out the light coming in this way by another stream of light coming in this way. How do you create darkons? Well, the basic idea was actually pretty simple. You just shine the LED light onto the pin photodiode all the time. When the pulse is coming in, you turn it off. So you're creating a negative pulse. And this does the job. And everything is AC coupled, so the DC component falls out. That's it.
Okay.
That was a patent.
Yeah, okay. We'll give Hal's email in case you have any questions about that, about that explanation. But I remember visiting Russia during Perestroika, right when Russia was falling, and going to one of their fancy hotels and going in their elevator. And one of the things I noticed is that when the doors opened, you could not go like this and keep the doors from closing anymore. They would just close in and they would crush your arms. So you did a lot of work on door openers. So
yeah.
What was the deal there?
Well, so the first real application, the first license deal I ever did was for automatic doors, the kind of sliding doors you see in airports and so on and so forth, which are everywhere today. The problem was that in the door industry, there was no kind of light curtain or safety system, so the doors would oftentimes come closed on people. And people get injured, and there were a lot of lawsuits because of this. So children get knocked over, elderly people get knocked over, and of course you don't want to hit people with these doors. So the basic idea that I developed was a light curtain from above using the sensor. So active infrared, pulses of light coming down from the top of the door in a fan shape on both sides of the sliding door, and then looking at the signal coming back. And again, using the photon bridge technology, it was ultra sensitive compared to the current state of the art at that time. And then processing that to see what the differences in reflectivity were. And it's really interesting because you think that dark clothing like this would be non-reflective, but actually in the infrared spectrum it could be quite reflective. So it generally saw pretty much everything, and it solved basically a huge problem for that industry. And that was the first license deal I did. And that was to a Swedish company called Bisem out of Landskrona, Sweden.
Do you know whether or not that technology is still being used today? Sounds like a pretty universal way of doing things.
I have no idea.
You have no idea?
I have no idea. I didn't track it after that. I got pretty busy with other stuff.
Okay. Well, another one was the faucet, the automatic faucet. Everybody has used the faucet where you run your hand under the faucet and the water starts coming out. Tell us a story about that. That's an interesting patent.
So once I did the license for Bisem for the sliding doors, I was looking for other applications. The license agreement was specific to automatic doors, so that left the entire rest of the universe open for other license agreements for other applications. And one obvious one was automatic faucets. So stick your hands under, the water comes out. And in fact, they had a pretty big problem because they had a lack of sensitivity and there was color sensitivity. So depending on your skin color, it might not work and so on and so forth. And also, they had issues with...
so what you're saying is some of these early faucet detectors were kind of racist, right?
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, they could be, yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So you wanted to get around that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But generally just to make it more sensitive and more reactive and have the potential for battery operation as well. So I worked on those and sold a bunch of licenses in that area to different faucet companies.
Okay.
Okay, I want to pause you for just a second.
Sure,
you said it was a super obvious application. What made it obvious to you?
To me?
Yeah, you've got what I would call a technical trick, an understanding you can use your efficient light reflecting measurement tool to measure a variety of things. I can imagine applications, we could make a list of 200 different applications.
Sure.
How did this one jump out at you? Why did you see this as the problem you could solve?
Well, like everybody else, I am out there in daily life and seeing things, and you go to the restroom and airports, and there are these automatic sensors. They didn't work very well, so
I remember the early days. They didn't
work very well.
There were crushed people lying all around. It was
yeah. So it just seemed kind of obvious that they might have an interest in that, and they did. They absolutely did.
I'm curious about those first phone calls. So you're calling a faucet company.
Yeah, there was no internet at the time, of course. This was like 1992, roughly, 93, 94. So even earlier, actually, it goes around not 92, 87, 88, yeah. I'm trying to think of the timeline. It's been a while now, it's a few years. But I would just go to the library and look up in directories of different industries and who are the major players, and they generally had phone numbers and addresses. So I'd write letters to people or call them up, and it was cold calling, but that was okay.
And how many companies did you contact?
Dozens.
Yeah.
And it's a numbers game.
And how many responses?
Like
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. The numbers game reference, because I agree. I think this is one of those things where you have to have a lot of conversations to get traction. But so dozens of contacts, attempts.
Yeah.
how many conversations resulted, and then how many hits?
Well, I got a lot actually.
Contracts?
In this particular case, I hit it right on for the faucet industry. It's a really hot
serious
issue.
pain point for
It's a
them.
serious pain point.
Yeah.
So I got responses from just about everybody. That doesn't mean I did a deal with everybody,
Yeah.
but I did a deal with several.
Okay.
So yeah, it was very worth doing. And again, it was pre-internet, so you had to wait and get responses and call people again, and but yeah, it was worth.
And some of these faucet companies would be international, right? I'm sorry, I'm diving.
No,
a little
they
deep
were really
on the,
they were really domestic.
Mostly
they're
domestic.
American.
Okay.
Yes. For
So your
example,
US patent
TNS
applied.
Brass, Sloan Valve Company.
Right, okay.
Chicago Faucets in particular. So
Okay.
these kind of companies. In fact, you go in the restroom here and you see these brands. Zurn was one of them. I think you have Zurn. I saw in the toilet you have Zurn flushers.
Okay.
So I talked to almost all these companies.
Okay.
Yeah, it was pretty funny.
Wow.
So-
you used the term, I'm going to ask Bradley a question. You used the word pain point. What do you mean by that?
Pain point, that is, as entrepreneurs, we want to respond to pains that people have. And in this case, dysfunction in the faucet or errors in the faucet. If it's causing some sort of level of pain, in particular, a level of pain that people would be willing to pay for a solution, that's where it gets interesting for us. And so I think it's interesting that, first of all, it came from your lived experience, which it doesn't always, right? There's way more pains in the world than any particular individual would experience, but in this case, you hit on one that was very common and broad, right? So we're looking for those broad potential marketplaces. So a lot of people having the pain or a high value of the pain being experienced.
I also want to say that one of my objectives was to remain independent as an independent consultant slash inventor, the inventor lifestyle of developing patents and doing licensing, getting checks in the mail. It's very attractive. You get all the holiday you want. You can do almost anything. It's a good life. It's a really good life. And you can use that money to parlay into other things that you might want to do, other kind of business opportunities or technologies. So I had a good income stream from these patent licenses. It was really, really good. And that was kind of my dream, and I wanted to keep doing that because it was a lot of fun too. I got to meet a lot of interesting people. I got flown to different countries. It's really a great lifestyle. There's a very dark side to this business, though, which I'll tell you in a little bit. But if you can conquer the dark side, it's a very alluring way to have a career.
I want to go back even a little further in your story, if I may.
Sure.
It took a lot of courage to step out from a place of employment, first with NIST and then later with Tektronics, and then to strike out on your own. Now, I know you had a contract in place. Maybe it was a side gig for you in today's parlance.
Yeah.
A side gig you had, but you leveraged that. How were you able to kind of wrap your mind around the courage necessary to step out on your own?
Oh, I was a very foolish guy. I didn't think too long and hard about it.
There's power in young and
I always
foolish.
knew that I could go back and get a day job. So having that as a backstop obviously helps. So I just went to the very limit of whatever pain I could tolerate, and if it got too bad, I'd just go get a job, right? So,
Okay.
So it's okay. It was cool. I didn't have expensive habits or expensive women or expensive anything. So it wasn't. I didn't have a lavish lifestyle to support. It was really just about getting out there and having this entrepreneurial attitude and developing something that people could use and something people would pay me for. And, I could live into retirement with a nice income stream. It's not a complicated proposition, right? It's just an interesting way to view a career option. Right?
Thank you.
Unlimited holidays, you work on the beach. What's wrong with that?
Before we get to the to the touch screen and the evolution of your ideas on touch screen, let's talk about the dark side. What are some of the dark sides that you've experienced as an entrepreneur and a developer?
Can we do that later in the,
You want to do it later?
context of you know who?
Oh, okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
we'll do it later.
in
and
the context of you.
I have no idea who who is, but
Yeah, you do.
we'll
You know
go with
full
that. Okay. Well, the next one is something that everybody uses today, which is the modern touch screen, which was an invention and patent, one of the 98 patents that Hal did. And I think it's just extraordinary. I mean, we all used automatic door openers. We all use the automatic faucets. We all use the football software, right? No, I guess we don't. That one kind of missed. But we all use the modern touch screen. But this did not happen at all at once. So how would you go through this? You developed different levels of the capacitive sensor for touchscreen. And yours wasn't the first touchscreen, but the previous ones were kind of stupid, right?
Can we back up just a little bit, Paul?
Just a little bit. Okay. Consider myself back up.
So we didn't get to how I did the capacitive.
Okay.
We're talking about the optics. And
so the
we never
optical
got
to the
further
capacitive,
yeah.
yes.
So one of the requirements I had from plumbing companies was to develop a sensor that could last for 5 years on batteries. And even the sensor I had couldn't do that. It could last for maybe a year, but they didn't want to replace the batteries so often. And rechargeables were not a thing back in the early 90s. So I thought about other technologies to replace the optical sensor because it was just too power hungry. And I went through passive infrared, I went through RF, I went through whatever you can imagine, acoustic, everything. And finally, I just hit on capacitive sensing. And I had the technical background to do capacitive sensors. But capacitive sensors at that point had a pretty sketchy history. They weren't very reliable. They were expensive, complicated. They weren't self-tuning. They were subject to interference from all kinds of radio sources and so on. So I went in with a little bit of trepidation to see if, it was fraught with some risk. But hey, I was getting paid license money, so it was another activity to try. And in fact, I was able to develop a new kind of sensor, which I called the charge transfer sensor. And in this particular scenario, I would use just digital switches to charge and transfer charge from an object. And in doing so, you could measure extraneous capacitance. So if we took Bob's phone here as an example, so if I may.
Okay. Yeah, oh, please.
So if we wanted to turn this into a sensor, what we do is connect a wire to it. This is mostly metal. So we connect a wire to it and to a switch which charges this thing up to a particular voltage. Let's say it's 5 volts. Then we open the switch, and that leaves the charge suspended on the phone. And then we have another switch which transfers that charge into a capacitor, which is a storage device. So almost all the charge is transferred into a much larger capacitor. Well, you can measure the voltage on the capacitor, and that will give you an indication of how much capacitance was there. Now, if you change the capacitance by moving your hand around this object, you'll change the voltage on the storage capacitor by microvolts. Not very much, but enough. It depends on the signal-to-noise ratio. But enough to get some signal out of it. And the question was how to do that cheaply and economically and to make it very reliable. And it turns out this digital method of capacitive sensing is extremely robust. You can do frequency hopping, you can do spread spectrum stuff, you can have narrow pulse widths and so on to suppress moisture films, and you can do all kinds of tricks with the switches, and they're very cheap, of course. And that was the basis of the next patent that I did, which was the charge transfer capacitive sensor. And that's what led me into all these other things we've been talking about, including touchscreens.
Including touchscreens.
Yeah.
So you've shared with me the epiphany that you had. I would call it a flash of genius, where all of a sudden you had the realization that you could do something with a specific chip that later you found out that the manufacturer of the chip said you couldn't do. But you had this thought that raced through your head. So could you kind of reconstruct that scenario? I think you were just sleeping at night or something, or trying to sleep with your mind racing.
Yeah, my mind is racing right now. At what point I should pick it up from that? Okay. So going from that particular circuit, which had a number of discrete components and a microcontroller and so on, it was still pretty expensive, but it did solve the plumbing problem. The question was how to reduce that in size and cost and make it really super small and super cheap. And the customers for this particular sensor that I just described were mostly industrial sensors and things where they could still tolerate some cost. And the plumbing companies, of course, that did a license for it in that business too. So that was okay. But for consumer devices, it was still way too expensive. We're talking, maybe $20, $30. And so the question was, what do you do? And one night, falling asleep, I was mulling this over in my head, and it just came to me that I could take a single chip micro, like an 8-pin micro from Microchip, 12C, 12LC, for whatever it was, 508 or whatever, and manipulate the switches in the output ports between tri-state mode and switching high and switching low. If you take 2 of those pins on the microcontroller, and you develop a certain pattern on these switches, and you have an external capacitor, which is the hold capacitor that I mentioned before, the storage capacitor, that's between the 2 pins. And then you have a lead going out to the sensing plate, and that's it, just some firmware, and that was it. And the microcontroller was 30 cents. So as soon as I realized that one night, I knew I hit gold. I just knew it, and I knew it would work. And the next day I went into the lab, and I tried it, and it took me like half an hour to write the code and test it, and it worked.
You said as soon as you realized it, you knew you were going to be rich, right?
I actually did think that.
Yeah.
Wow. I'm sorry. So there were some steps in between the original sensor and that 8-pin micro version. But at that time, I already had a company in the UK. And I don't know if you want to cover why I went to the UK.
Sure. Let's do that.
Okay. So
before we move on from this,
Sure,
I'm
okay.
still stuck on the insight sort of moment.
Yeah.
So clearly, and look, there's a lot of electrical engineers in the room. They're understanding a lot of what you're saying in terms of the technical piece.
Technology.
And what I hear you is you studied these things. There was a lot of input into your head about what are the specs on this chipset.
Yeah.
You clearly understood what each of the pins was being used for, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of just knowledge that went
I had
into...
the register model in my head, everything.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then there was a different moment or a different kind of thinking that produced this insight. Can you maybe just tease out a little bit of what you think was going on when you came to that realization?
I think there's a lot of subconscious work that goes on. If you have a problem, it's stuck in your head for days and days and weeks. Your subconscious is working on it, and just suddenly the answer just kind of pops out. Mm-hmm. And maybe the answer that pops out is wrong, but sometimes you just know when it's right. Mm-hmm. You just have that intuition that it's right.
But in this case, the company actually argued with you? They believed what you had
that came
come
later.
up with?
That came much later.
Okay.
Yeah, because I actually developed a whole business selling these chips before the company knew what I was doing.
Oh, wow.
And the reason they found out what I was doing was because I was selling so many of these chips, I couldn't buy the chips through distribution anymore. I had to have a direct account with the manufacturer. And at that point, they asked me what the heck I'm doing with these chips, right? Because I'm buying reels of these chips. And I wanted them to do the programming. I wanted them to put the firmware in for me, because programming was a headache.
So you didn't have to flash
I
them
needed to
and-
hire.
yeah.
I needed to buy a big machine to do the programming and quantity and so on. So I didn't want to do the flashing, right? I wanted them to do it, and I wanted to laser mark my company's logo on the top of the chip, so it looked like my company, right? So it was a bit of a Potemkin village, but that's what a lot of companies do, right? They buy silicon, they put their own markings on top. So that was part of the strategy or the business plan I was evolving as I was going on with this whole process. So I called I called Microchip, I called the local rep from the company, and he didn't want to talk to me. So I kept escalating up the Microchip chain. Microchip is Arizona. They're, you guys probably don't know them. And I finally got to the CEO of Microchip, Steve Sangi, and Steve invited me to Arizona to the company. And he had meantime asked his engineers to evaluate my tech and see whether it was viable or not and whether the scope, because I'm asking for a direct account. This is now a board level kind of decision because we're doing lots and lots of these chips. So I got to his office. I was in his office, boardroom like this one here, and there were a bunch of his executives sitting around. I knew some of them. And Steve says to me, we had our engineers analyze your stuff and it doesn't work. It can't possibly work.
Oh, boy.
I said, why? Well, they said, I don't know. He wasn't a technical guy. He said, this switching arrangement, it's just not going to work. It's impossible. All the engineers that looked at this said it won't work. I said, well, we're selling thousands of your chips and it works. So
what's the problem?
And then one of the managers said, we don't want to do this direct agreement with Mr. Philipp. We're not going to do it with him. And Steve Sangi, to his credit, he stared them down and he said, yes, we are. I think this guy has something. And he gave me a direct account.
Wow.
And that changed the whole course of the company. So, yeah, I had to screw up the courage to call him in the first place, but setting up that meeting was really crucial. And it had to be face-to-face. You can't do this on Zoom call. You really had to read body language. You have to really understand the subtleties of what's going on in the conversation. If you think you can run a tech company solely on Zoom calls, you will not. It's not the best or most efficient way of doing it. The best way is you fly there, you sit down, you talk.
Wow.
You read the body language. You see what's going on in their minds. You see the faces of the other people in the room, which Zoom will filter out. You had to read it. You had to read the room. And so he gave me that, and we bought tens and hundreds of thousands of these chips, ungodly quantities of these chips. And I had the company in the UK at that time. I had started my company in Florida, but I moved to the UK to do a joint venture. We kind of missed that part of it.
Okay.
So I was in the UK, and I had an accidental company because I was supposed to be doing a joint venture with a British company to sell this technology into the European market. I was only going to be there for 2 years. Yeah, it was an accidental company.
Wow.
remember, my business model in my head was I was a sole guy selling license agreements, right? So and making money, and I can go have all the holidays I want. And in this case, this joint venture failed because the company couldn't uphold their part of the bargain. The quality was bad. They weren't putting the money into it. I took the technology back. This was around 1996, 97 timeframe. And so I had customers at that point, and it's like, how do I support the customers on my own? I'm just a single guy, operating out of a rental house in the south coast of England. And so I had to start hiring people. And that's like the point of no return. And so...
Why is that? Hiring people is a point of no
Then
return.
you have to have a corporation.
Oh, that's your accidental company.
And you have responsibilities.
And then you have to do payroll.
Okay, I got you.
And you have to do corporate taxes, and that's feeding on itself. It's a virtuous circle because now that you have an employee, you're more productive, so you're selling more. So now you have to hire more employees. Now you have to hire engineers. Now you have to hire accounting department. So I had an accidental company. It's kind of, I say that with a little bit of a smile, but because it wasn't truly accidental, but it had that sort of flavor about it. It was not intended, let's put it that way. I didn't intend to start that company. I sort of fell into it. And I kind of embraced it. I thought it was a pain in the you-know-what, but I sort of went with the flow. I tried to write a business plan at some point. I tried to get venture capital at some point. This was the year 2000. I tried to get VC money.
Just to point out, you had never asked for a penny of venture capital before.
No, I was
then.
self-funded.
All this was done in your own dime.
Yeah, it was all self-funded. But remember, I had the revenue stream coming in from other patents. So this gave me a sort of a base level of income that I could do other things with and invest into this operation. It wasn't huge amounts of money. We're not talking like even hundreds of thousands, like 50, 60,000 a year. It's sort of minimal, right? But it was enough leverage, enough cash to give me some leverage to do what I needed to do for the company. And then the cash just kept coming in because the sales just went geometric. It just absolutely went exponential. As soon as we started selling this little 8-bit microcontroller, that was the key moment for the business at that point. Yeah.
So let me ask you, you were recognized by the Queen of England for your business.
That came much later. Yeah.
That was later?
That was much later.
Okay.
Yeah, it was before I sold the company.
Before you sold the company?
Yeah.
Okay, so you were much bigger than what you were doing now. Okay, so is it time to go into the touch screen?
No.
No? Okay, what's next?
So up until this point in time, I was doing single point touch sensors, so single channel, so you touch, or proximity, single channel stuff. But I soon realized you could expand it into a linear sensor, so you could do a stripe sensor, so you could get analog output. So you'd have two sensors on two ends of a conductive strip or some geometric set of electrodes, and you get a ratio of the two endpoints. And so I did that and produced a chip that did that. And then found out that, okay, you can do a scroll wheel like on the iPod, so you could wrap it into a circle, so you can do that. That's three channels of sensing. And then I developed for General Electric in Louisville, Kentucky. They approached me around 1999. They wanted to have touch controls for their Monogram family of appliances, and it was like 60 touch buttons on a cooktop, on a oven, whatever. And so that was a lot of chips, and it wasn't really economical to expand it to that.
What were they trying to do with all these chips? They were trying to do
controls on the stove. Or whatever it was, the micro, whatever it was.
The 20 or 30 controls.
Yeah, well, there's a keypad, there's all the cook modes and, all this stuff, right?
Typical stuff.
A lot. They got up towards 60 on some of these.
Wow.
It's huge numbers of buttons.
That sounds like something they
custom
call...
labeled node buttons. And
they call it feature creep. You just get too many features.
So the question was, how do you do that with the current technology that I had? And I knew that I couldn't commercially adapt the technology I had to this kind of application. It was a lot of channels of sensing. So I tried to figure out how to make it into a matrix. In a matrix, you have cross wires like this. So you have electrodes that are emitting pulses sequentially. So pulse this one, then this one, this one, this one. And then you have other electrodes that cross. They don't touch, but there's a dielectric in between. And then you're receiving the charge through a dielectric. So you have like a plastic layer or a glass layer in between. And you're receiving charge on these electrodes. And you can differentiate all 16, in this case 4x4, you can differentiate all 16 nodes independently. They're completely independent channels. There's no crosstalk at all. And so that was the basis for the General Electric contract, and that was around 1999. And so I developed that technology, and in fact, it was very cheap to produce again. The external circuitry was very minimal, and that was a very successful contract. When I did that contract, I then realized that once you had this XY matrix of sensors, you could interpolate between the two of them, and that gives you a touchscreen. So you just had to have them in a regular arrangement, and you got the individual channel outputs from every crossing. Every crossing generates an output. Even just 8 bits is enough. And then you take the next channels around it, and by using ratiometric analysis, you can figure out where the finger is touching on a two-dimensional surface. So that became another set of patents.
Is that basically the same sort of touchscreen we use today?
It is.
It is. Okay.
Yeah, they're all based on the same principle.
But your patent is expired.
Yeah, sadly. But I don't get any money from it now. And even since I sold the company, that's another question.
What surprises me about you, Hal, is that once your patent expires, you don't keep track of the technology anymore. You just kind of...
No, I let go.
You let go and you go on to the next thing.
Yeah.
So it's always about the adventure of the next step.
Yeah. You want to talk about Apple next?
Talk about Apple, yes. Let's talk about Apple. One of the things that Hal taught me is that when you get a patent is only a license to sue. Nobody else is going to defend your patent at all. You have to. So it's a license to sue.
Correct.
This is the parable that goes with that saying.
Correct. So if somebody steals your car, you call the police. If somebody steals your patent, you're stuck. You have to pay money, a lot of money, to defend your patent. It's just the way the world works. And that's the dark side of inventions, because if you have a really great idea, people will steal your patent. It's guaranteed. Don't think otherwise. It's absolutely guaranteed. And if you can't defend your patent, if you don't have the resources to defend your patent, the rest of the world will get the message that you're a soft touch, that you're weak, somebody stole it already, you didn't do anything about it, so everybody's going to steal it. And then you have nothing left. That's the real world. That's the real world. A patent is a license to sue. That's all it is.
So you had license to Motorola, Samsung, GE, and Apple, but then something happened with Apple that raised your eyebrows. Could you go into that?
Well, Apple was one of the first licenses I did with this technology, one of the very first. The other cases I was, with the capacitor, I was really selling, except for the automatic faucets, of course. But in the case of Apple, I was, just from a marketing perspective, I was a one-man band, okay? I had a very small company around the year 2000, and I had like 5 people at that point in time. So I was doing my own sales and marketing, and I was writing articles and so on. So the principal means of marketing was actually writing articles for trade journals. So I'm pretty good at writing, and so at least I think I am. So I'd write an article about an application of one of my patents. I would do the drawings. I would have a professional photographer do a very nice photograph. And I would submit it to, for example, Sensors Magazine or Appliance Magazine or any of these commercial trade magazines. And every time I would get on the front cover. The front cover. Wow. Not buried on page 65. It was the front cover. Why? Because I had a great photograph.
Yes.
That's it.
Yes.
It was a beautiful abstract. I mean, the photographer I hired was amazing. This is all pre-digital stuff, right? So this is late 90s. And all analog with film and everything, you know, so but did a great job. And I submitted those, and I got on the cover every time. I have so many covers in magazines, I stopped counting.
Wow.
And one of those magazines was read by an engineer at Apple. His name was Chris Craw. And he was working on the G4 Power Cube, which is around the year 2000. I don't know if some of you remember that. It was a box, a cube, a passive radiator, didn't have a fan in it. It was one of Johnny Ive's creations, I guess. And it had a capacitive touch button on it because Steve Jobs had decreed that they would use capacitive touch. It was sexy, it was cool, you know. The problem, as Chris Craw described to me, was that their capacitive sensor cost about $35 and didn't work worth a damn. So when your phone went off next to the computer, it would switch it on and off. You know, if your cat went by, it would switch it on and off. And, you know, so not very reliable and horribly expensive. Chris Craw saw my chip. I was selling through distribution at the time, through DigiKey, which some of you may know. And it was a catalog item, along with a bunch of other derivations that I had going through DigiKey. He bought one, and he stuck it in the computer, and it worked first time. And the cost was about $1.50 or something like that. So that's what the retail price was in small quantities. And so I got a call from him, and an invite to come to Cupertino. So I did. I went out there and had a conversation. And it turned out that the G4 was quickly discontinued, so I didn't get in there. But Chris Craw went over to the monitors group, and it was decreed then that they would put my chip into their monitors. So yeah, the desktop monitors. And that was just the single point sensor. It was nothing sexy, nothing fancy, just on-off, and menu functions. So the senior buyer for Apple that was involved in this transaction called me and said that they couldn't possibly do business with my company, which was Quantum Research Group, by the way, if you want to look it up. Couldn't possibly do business with us because we're too small. We had maybe 8 people or something, and it was a liability for them. If we went bankrupt, then the supply chain would be disrupted, and you just can't do that. So that's a lesson in business right there. You have to find an alternative means to market if you're too small sometimes. In this case, I said, well, how about licensing it? Because I knew license models, right? So I said, let's license it. They said, yeah, we do licensing all the time. We'll license it. So I wrote a license agreement with Apple. And yeah, so it went into their monitors, and that ran for, I think, 5 years or so. Microchip was selling the actual chips themselves directly to the suppliers in Japan and Korea. And I was getting royalties. My company was getting royalties, which was very cool. They got very angry with me, though, because I refused to sign the terms and conditions that Apple laid out. They first signed the contract, the license agreement. Then they presented me the T's and C's after that. And I read the terms and conditions. And I read the terms and conditions and said that I will not work with any competitor for Apple for the rest of my career. And I said, no, I don't think so. Thank you very much. And that made them very angry. Yeah.
Can we go back to they rejected you as a direct supplier.
Yeah.
But we're okay with
as
licensing.
A license, yes, because the supplier was then Microchip directly, which is a Fortune 500 type company.
Right. So did they specify the parameter on which they rejected you? I know supplier evaluation, supplier qualification is a big issue in supply chain management, operations management.
Too small, that's it.
Just too small?
Just too small.
Okay.
Yeah, they just wouldn't work with a tiny micro-sized company.
Okay.
Yeah, that's it.
All right. But they were comfortable with the license.
Absolutely.
And so,
yeah.
All
so
right.
in my pack of tricks was licensing agreements. So
okay, so how did you get past their terms and conditions?
I didn't.
That were unrealistically...
I just didn't sign them.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and the manager was fired the next week.
Oh.
Because he screwed up. He should have presented the T's and C's first.
I see.
Yeah. I know his name. I'm not going to repeat it here.
Okay. But his initials were... No, don't. Don't go there.
Yeah,
Okay.
that was really something. And so I guess Steve Jobs got really angry with me. So that colored the rest of the relationship with Apple, not in a good way. But I didn't know it had gotten that bad. So when I developed the touchscreen, I took some models to Cupertino. And I met with Johnny Ive and a team of engineers and managers, and again in a conference room about this size. And they oohed and awed over it. And I had a private meeting with Johnny Ive afterwards and all that stuff. And I said, yeah, we'll get back to you. And they never did. They never did. And the rest is kind of history. They stole everything from that point on. Everything. There wasn't a patent that I had that they probably didn't steal in some fashion, in terms of capacitive sensing, at that point in time.
So that's the reputation for some of the larger companies. They use your technology without considering the ownership at all. And then if you get cross with them, you either go to court, and if you don't have the resources, you lose your shirt. If you do have the resources, well, the legal thing plays out. And sometimes they come to you and say, we'll buy your company. We'll give you a few $1 million and we'll just buy your company and, to heck with you. So elaborate on that and what Apple did and what you did in response to that and the idea that patents give you a license to sue.
Sure. So once I realized what they were doing, it was, again, a survival thing that kind of kicked in. Either I sued them or I would lose the company eventually. It's just a matter of time. Because everybody in the industry knew what was going on. They all took apart the Apple products. And I got calls from people. So you got to deal with Apple. No, actually I don't. Because they knew whose tech was in there. So Motorola, for example, I quickly licensed Motorola when they were still in the handset business. So they got a touchscreen license from me. They didn't develop it to the degree that Apple did later, but around about 2005, I was kind of pleading with Apple, with the legal department, to do business with me and to be honest and all these, to be ethical and all the things they claim to be as a company. My lawyer explained to me that basically companies like Apple, big American companies are, let's say they're a little ethically challenged. What they will do is they'll take what they want in the marketplace. They see a good idea, they just steal it. And they just wait for the pennies to drop, see if anything happens after that. So in many cases, if you're a tiny company, you don't have the resources to sue, so it slides by. And eventually, like I said, you lose your company. In some cases, if you think you have the money to sue, you go and sue them, but then you go bankrupt from the legal fees. So
you have to have deep pockets.
You have to have really deep pockets to sue. And so I was faced with this conundrum. So it took me about a year to figure out whether this was the proper course, what the proper course was. And I did sue them in 2006. And the lawsuit involved several things. It involved, first of all, the trackpad on the notebook, which was mine. It involved the iPad, which was mine. It involved the mouse. They called it the Mighty Mouse. It had a capacitive switch in it. That was mine. And the scroll wheel on the iPod, that was mine. They took all those things without permission. Just about everything that I'd done to that point in time was mine. And their attitude was, well, sue us. Okay, so you have to sue them.
So you did?
I did. Fortunately, as a company, we were doing really super well. Between license agreements and money coming in from that, money coming in from chip sales, we were really flying pretty high, and we had a lot of cash in the bank. And remember, we had no venture capital. So I ran the company extremely tight, really super tight. And there was no fluff in that organization whatsoever. We had secondhand office furniture. We were subletting from a company that was slowly going bankrupt and expanding into their space. And so we optimized our rental needs. And so we had the cash. And so 2006 came around and they weren't responding. And my lawyer was saying this, you're not going to get anything out of them. It's like squeezing a rock, So I filed a lawsuit. And in 2007, I spent $3 million just in that year alone on litigation.
On legal fees. Oh, my gosh.
Just against Apple. 90% of it was against Apple.
Wow.
We had other lawsuits as well, but that was the major one. And then there was a discovery process. So if you sue somebody in civil court, they have the chance to go through your file cabinets and all your electronic records and everything, and you have to produce these. So you need staff to do all that and produce all these documents and upload them to a cloud storage facility.
But that's discovery. And
that's discovery.
That's only in the U.S., though.
Yes, it's mostly in the U.S.
Mostly in the U.S.
There's some limited discovery in the U.K., but that's U.S. So, but the lawsuit was the U.S., so I had to play by U.S. rules.
Okay.
And so that was very disruptive. All that is very disruptive to your organization. You just, all your people are involved in this sideshow, right, that has no bearing on your actual business, but you have to do it. And it's a bit disheartening, honestly. But we won the Markman hearing. The Markman hearing is where the judge will decide on your claims. And I had something like 20 claims in the dominant patent that they were violating, that the lawsuit was about. And one of the claims was disallowed, only one out of the 20. And so the lawsuit was allowed to proceed to trial. And then the iPhone came out in 2007. So this is the following year. And when the iPhone came out, we opened that up and realized that there was another patent involved. And my lawyer said, well, you're going to have to file a second lawsuit.
Oh, jeez.
And it's like, okay, well, yeah.
And so you did?
No, I didn't.
You didn't?
No,
Okay.
I decided to sell the company.
Okay.
There comes a point where you have to get out. This is really, really critical. You have to know when to leave. You have to know when you're at your peak and when it's time to go. I woke up one morning and I said, this isn't fun. Just not having a good time. It wasn't about the money. It was just not having a good time. So I made one phone call and I sold the company to my principal supplier, which was Atmel in San Jose. Atmel does the AVR family. They were bought up later by Microchip. There's a really interesting story involving Microchip and Atmel, but that's for another time maybe.
Okay.
But yeah, there was a lot of rivalry. Anyway, I knew the CEO because I'd just done a license agreement with them, so I knew the CEO. His name was Steve. And I called him up and he said, I'll be on a plane as soon as I can, a couple of days. Meanwhile, don't talk to anybody else. I'll make you an offer you can't refuse. Yeah.
Did he have a cat on his lap?
Yeah. He did. He did.
I know none of us like to spend a lot of money on locks for our doors, but a good defense is necessary. And clearly in this case, you needed to activate those defensive mechanisms like a
Sure.
lawsuit.
Yeah.
What was it that triggered you? You said it took a year to decide to go to court. And by the way, you're not the only small business that has decided to do this. Would be interesting to kind of dig up the various stories. I know Massimo continues to play out with their oxygen sensor and heart rate sensors in the watch. But I'm just curious about that decision, how you came to the conclusion, okay, it's time, we have to activate this, we have to do this.
Well, it was just the fact that they weren't responding. I really did put in a lot of good faith effort and communication to their legal team and to their management to try to do business with me and honestly accept a license agreement and pay money. And they were just stonewalling. And also I was looking at the financial situation of the company, the other things the company was involved in at that point. And so it's a kind of a balancing act. It's not just about deciding to sue, but also when to sue. And knowing that you have the resources to back it up, right? So if I had run out of cash, if the company had run out of cash during the middle of the lawsuit, then it would have been a catastrophe. That what happens next is that you go bankrupt, and then Apple, for example, could buy the company out of bankruptcy and get all the patents. It kind of works like that, So it's a very dangerous game. It's really super dangerous. There's no backup plan, really. You either do it or you don't do it. And so I did it. And we were winning, except that, again, would have had to file another lawsuit, civil suit, and go through the discovery process again and pay another $3 million a year and whatever. And by the way, even if you win the litigation in civil court, that doesn't mean you actually win the whole overall case.
What?
You can win the battle but lose the war. So they can appeal that decision through the appeals process, and it could take you 10 years to get your money. 10, even more. I mean, there's the infamous case of the automatic windshield wiper, which is like a 1960s patent or something, and this went on for like 20 years. The guy got it just before he died. He got the money finally. And he got like 20 cents out of the dollar of what he was really owed. So, and the other trick that they will do is, an Apple, for example, or any company in this kind of scenario, might offer you 10 cents on the dollar just to make the whole thing go away. So you think you got something, but actually they got off really cheap. And that just makes the whole thing go away, right? So, but yeah, do you really want to do that? Not really, no.
The case where they had the automatic windshield wiper, they made that into a movie called Flash of Genius.
Did they?
Yeah, and so that's, if you want to watch the story in a pseudo-documentary where actors play out things, it's a good thing to watch. But it really shows the difficulty of going up against a Goliath when you're a little David,
It's a very amoral business. There's no ethics involved. The company can spout all they want in public about ethics and morality and how they treat small suppliers. It's BS. Well, at the end of the day, they do what they want to do. That's just the way the world works. That's just the way the world works.
So has this changed you, this experience, as an entrepreneur, as an individual? Has living through that attack and defense changed you?
Yeah, I don't want to get back in that business, that's for sure. It was a bit traumatic, So, I won the battle because the lawsuits went with the company when I sold the company.
Right.
And Atmel picked up all the litigation and settled with Apple, so they did their thing. But meanwhile, I got paid, so I had a really good positive outcome. And since I didn't have venture capital, I basically owned the whole company. I had a stock option program and so on, so some percentages went to friends and family who supported me in the early days and employees and so on. That's great, but I didn't have to pay off a VC house, so it was mine basically, and that was nice. So that was anti-traumatic. That was the good part, right?
Right.
That was a good result. Would I do it again if I knew what I was facing from the very start? Not so sure.
So what's the vision now?
I'm retired.
Well, let me enter fiction land then for a moment.
Yeah.
If you were going to continue working, continue inventing, would it be back as the solo inventor, licenser?
That's a tough one. It is a lot of fun. You get so much euphoria out of doing that. But it's also a bit manic depressive too. You have some really great times, really great successes. The eureka moments come, and you're flying high, and you do a license agreement, you're really flying high, and then somebody steals your patent, and it's like you're down in the cellar, Yeah. So it's really a roller coaster ride, and in shark-infested waters as well. Would I do it again? That's really tough. That's really, I don't know. It's hard to second guess.
Yeah.
I tell people, don't try this at home. It's a very dangerous game. I didn't know. I did it because I was ignorant of the dangers. Honestly, I had no idea, no way to predict it would be this dangerous and this stressful. And if I had known, I probably would have said no. I'll just get a day job.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, this kind of may be a good time to transition to recommendations. I think it'd be very interesting, particularly since we have some young potential entrepreneurs in the room, as well as some experienced entrepreneurs in the room.
Yeah.
What advice would you be giving to, especially engineers who are considering it? What guidance would you give them, maybe to protect them from these moments, this stress?
Tell you, just a little footnote on that. In engineering at universities, we teach people to go to work for Boeing, Motorola, Tektronics. We don't teach them about the possibility of entrepreneurism. And hopefully, we can put something together which emphasizes that a little bit more, because that's just not an option. So I think your advice is going to be very useful.
Yeah. So, I think if I were to do it over again, I would probably get a little more assistance. I would probably associate with a larger organization in some fashion and cut a deal.
Okay. So
size matters in this business. So if you're a large corporate, you get respect, and they're not so likely to cheat. That being said, I don't know if any of you know, but the name iPhone was stolen from Cisco. That's
Really?
how ballsy these guys are. Absolutely. iPhone was a VoIP phone from Cisco.
VoIP, I'm not sure.
VoIP, voice over IP.
Oh, okay.
And they just decided to steal the name and let the chips fall where they may. And apparently Steve Jobs did a deal with Cisco and secured the name finally. I don't know how much he paid her. I think it's all a private settlement. But, even being big is not a guarantee. But it's certainly helpful, and certainly in terms of financial backing. So being affiliated with a larger organization that has a little bit of moxie, a little bit of presence in the marketplace, and financial backing is useful. Getting VC backing might be useful too, but then you give up a lot of your company. So it's a balancing act, right? So which do you want to do?
What about co-founders? Maybe having a team instead of an individual.
Sure, that could be helpful. Yeah. Co-founders, but then, if you're going to build a team, I mean, the classic Silicon Valley route is you get a team together and get VC money. And so you have a step function capability and financial backing. So that's really not a bad route, and that's why people do that. But in the context of what I did, you have to understand that I just wanted to be a solo operator. I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to have a company. I didn't want to have a team. I didn't want any of these things. I just want to be able to go to the Bahamas, go on vacation, okay, and have a nice life. And it didn't work out that way. But that was my whole mindset, and that's why I went down that path. And I sort of organically fell into this path that went down this road of ending up setting up a company in England and then getting involved in all this stuff. And yeah, it is what it is, so it wasn't necessarily optimal, but it's my particular story. And
Okay.
yeah, I wouldn't necessarily advise it for other people, but yeah.
But it looks like it's having a happy ending here, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Hal lived happily ever after, right? After the story is over.
Mostly.
Okay.
Mostly.
Okay. Any other thoughts, Bradley?
No, wonderful stories, and I appreciate in particular the story of patents, licensing, and being bought out. So thank you for sharing.
You're welcome.
One other dark side is your experience with trolls.
Oh yeah,
People would call him up, recognize he was rich, and say, "You violated my patent, and I'm going to take you to court unless you pay me money." Some of these are just nuisances.
I had one in particular. It was the guy used to be patent counsel for Texas Instruments, and he went to a little company called Nartron in Michigan, and he was a professional patent troll. He had a deal with his law firm, where the law firm would collect a percentage of the action of whatever he could shake down from companies. And he shook down General Electric to the tune of maybe $5 or $6 million. They just paid the money. He accused them of violating his patents. He had some very old capacitive patents. Didn't affect anything that I was doing, certainly. And he just filed a lawsuit against General Electric. And they just had the policy of just paying people off. No protest, just paid them off. Then I knew this guy. He was kind of an operator in the business. And then he came to me and he said, "You're violating my patents." It was a complete tosh. It was rubbish. And I decided to fight him. So again, his business model, he was in Michigan. He was in, Grand Rapids, Michigan, I think it was, yeah. Thank you. I've been out of the States too long. And his law firm was in Detroit or something. But anyway, the lawsuits were all being done in Michigan. And the law firm had its own expenses to pay, and that's it. So there was almost no out-of-pocket for these guys. So the company, Nartron, didn't really have to pay the law firm anything to do these lawsuits. It was a joint venture between these two organizations, the company and the law firm. So that was the Achilles heel. So all I had to find was whether this company, Nartron, was selling product in Pennsylvania, because I had a base in Pennsylvania and a law firm in Pennsylvania at that time. And indeed, he had sold to an Army depot some technology, something recently at that time, so in Pennsylvania. So I had found that out through something in the press. So I had my Pittsburgh law firm file suit against Nartron preemptively before he could file a suit against. He had been threatening to file a suit for like several weeks. That gave me the basis to file a countersuit even before he filed his primary suit. And I did it in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is the town where I grew up. And they fought that tooth and nail because suddenly they would have to hire a Pittsburgh law firm and pay money to a law firm. That's not their business model. And they could potentially lose. So that's a very aggressive move to try to get them out of their home turf. And in fact, he screamed uncle at the end of the day because he knew he would lose the case because they had no basis for the lawsuit. It was just a shakedown. He was just expecting to pay money. And so we settled. And that was that. He went away.
He went away. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I tell you what, with Bradley's permission, if anybody has any questions that they'd like to ask Hal, we can open it up for Q&A. Is that okay?
Yeah, sure.
One of the things, Hal is here from Switzerland. He's still suffering from jet lag a little bit, right?
A little bit.
You're doing okay?
If I'm talking gibberish, it's...
No, it's a fascinating story, isn't it? Just fascinating. So if anybody has any questions, now would be a good time to think about it. Do you have any regrets? I think one of the things you said, you created a generation of zombies or something.
Yes. Yeah. I do say that. I think it is true. It's true that without the touchscreen, you would have no iPhone. It simply wouldn't exist.
Yeah.
They would have had to find some other technology. The technologies at the time were resistive, where you're pressing two layers into each other, an overlaying plastic layer with microdot spacers into an underlying layer, indium tin oxide matrix, yeah. But it wasn't interpolative, so it didn't give you nearly infinite, or essentially infinite resolution, and certainly no multi-touch. So doing it from underside a piece of glass was totally novel. It was only my technology that could do that. And so without that, you wouldn't have the phones that you have today. Eventually, somebody would have done it, sure. But and to his credit, Steve Jobs was a visionary, and he's the one who put this together. And I owe him a huge debt of gratitude, because even though he stole everything, he actually gave it recognition for what it was and made my company worth a lot of money, because everybody knew where the iPhone came from, really, where the key technology came from. And I was recognized for that throughout the industry. Everybody knew. I'd been talking to all of them for years, including Nokia and RIM in Canada, BlackBerry, who rejected the technology, by the way. So you know what happened to them. So it made my company grow and have the valuation it did. Now, could it have been worth more? Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Could have been worth a lot more had they dealt with my company honestly. But nevertheless, the result was very satisfying. I'm pretty happy. You know, I could have done a lot worse. If he hadn't stolen it or done anything with it, then my company would just continue to grow. Yeah, nice exponential ramp. And I would not have exited so soon. But you also wouldn't have the iPhone, which is a key piece of technology for the 21st century.
no social media or minimal social media.
Well, there's that too. So the App Store and all the social everything, it has created a generation of zombies, as we all know. People texting across the table from each other, to each other. It's a little bit sad, quite honestly. I think it's removed a lot of direct personal interaction. This is quite sad.
We have a question.
If you could generalize.
Could you? We have a microphone here. Microphone. That's how it's phonetically pronounced, by the way.
McCroffin.
I'd love if you could generalize a little bit more about your thoughts on the patent system and any possible reforms. The standard story that we teach when we analyze innovation is that there's some unfortunate consequences of patenting models. What we usually focus on is the fact that for the duration of that patent, the patent holder has a monopoly on the technology, can charge monopoly prices, earn monopoly profits. The way we explain this is, well, there's a trade-off. We have to issue these temporary legal monopolies to induce people to invent things. And that on balance, having the kind of patent system like we have in the US, most Western countries, increases the amount of useful and valuable innovation that we get in society. From reading many accounts of how the patent system works in practice, including some of your stories today, that standard story seems less and less obvious given that companies, in particular large companies, are using technologies that they find to be valuable, whether they're patented or not.
Yeah.
That the outcome of patent litigation depends on all kinds of factors other than the underlying merits. The patent trolling, people talk about patent thickets and the inability to bring useful innovations to market because there are so many, they could infringe on so many potential patent holders' rights. Would we be better off in a world with no patent law whatsoever or with a different kind of patent law from the one that we have today?
So I haven't thought too deeply about that subject, but it is a really interesting subject and worthy of further analysis. I think the patent system we have today is actually pretty good. It doesn't really protect small inventors like myself, but overall it certainly does foster development and innovation. There's a profit incentive to have something innovative and to have that monopoly. I think that's good. Patent pools are interesting. In the handset business, for example, patents are typically pooled into collections, which are then licensed and so on. So they're free market approaches to making the technology more universally available. And among large corporates, patents are typically used to defend their own product lines, but also as a means of bartering. So big corporates will barter patents with other corporates. So I've got these 6 patents that you want, and you got 10 patents that I want, and so let's do a deal.
Right, but does that lead to over-patenting? Patenting simply to have a large portfolio you
Sure.
use in bargaining rather than patenting to be able to bring things to market?
Yeah, I think there is abuse like that, absolutely. I've seen a lot of patents which are just not worth the paper they're printed on. But then the court system has to sort it out, and again, that's a very expensive proposition.
Yeah.
Or if you think a patent is very weak, you just violate it. The standard approach in patent negotiation, what's the right word here? So in dealing with people with other patents that you want is you try to knock them out, right? So you find some prior art, maybe the examiner missed that in the examination process, and you feel like you have a very strong position to go ahead and utilize that patent, not contractually, but just use it and then let the chips fall where they may. And Apple certainly tried to knock out my claims. They didn't succeed. So there is a process for all these things. Is it perfect? No. I can't think of a better approach than what we have currently today. Some things could be streamlined. The patent examination process, to my mind, is too long.
Yeah.
3 years to get a patent is just way unacceptable. It should be 1 year max. And it's not terribly expensive to get a patent, but if you're going to get global patents, that is a very expensive proposition, of course, for a small company. What else could you improve? I don't know what else you could really do. Maybe some things in the civil, in the civil litigation process could be streamlined. Maybe cutting short some of the appeals processes so these things don't drag out for decades. That could be improved. Discovery, I've heard, was improved recently. Somebody told me that. I'm not familiar with the details, but I understand that discovery has been cut back quite substantially. So that's also helpful for small entrepreneurs. Does that answer your question? Or?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
Great. Anything else? Another thing that Apple stole. Okay, backstory. I asked my class, graduate class in electrical engineering, if they knew who Paul McCartney was. Half of them didn't know. Okay, so Paul McCartney was a member of the Beatles. And one of the things the Beatles did is they founded their own record label, which was Apple, which was taken by Steve Jobs. And there was a big litigation between the Beatles' Apple and Steve Jobs' Apple, who owned that trademark. And I forget the outcome, but it was an ugly thing. So this goes into the history of just people taking other people's things if they can. So
Shark-infested waters.
Shark-infested waters.
Seriously.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
What I'm most curious about right now is the different levels of dependence versus independence that you can approach the entrepreneurship life with. For example, do you just, there's from the complete independence, it's you in your garage, you've got some ideas and you're contracting and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And the opposite end of the spectrum is, you're working a 9 to 5 with a company that you don't really get to keep any of the intellectual property that you end up coming up with. It all gets transferred over. So I imagine somewhere in there, there's an optimal middle ground. Let's say you make a small company and spin it off in the growth period or something like that. What are your thoughts on kind of the middle ground there, or what would be an optimal spot?
I think if you're starting out as I did, you need to find your footing and, to get comfortable with being operating solo. A middle ground could consist of, Bradley, as you mentioned, having a small team or something like that, having co-ventures in this process and keeping it small and lean. That could be a middle ground. I think that's a very useful way to go about it, just to have some other people with you. And if you have a really great idea and the patent looks pretty solid, certainly go for some outside money to support the company. So again, I was completely a bootstrap operation, and that's tough. That's really tough. I was fortunate because I had previous license agreements which paid me money, so I would not be on the street with a shopping cart under a bridge. But on the other hand, it still was pretty tight, and I had to manage the money very, very carefully. There's stress points you have to avoid, and operating completely solo will give you a lot of stress for sure if you play this game.
Well.
Could you talk a little bit about patent strategy? You mentioned that you got a singular patent. We just brought up the idea of patent thickets. I appreciate that. And I know a lot of the startups we're working with end up applying for a wide variety of patents to establish some white space in the patent literature.
Yeah, sure.
To create a lot of layers of protection.
Sure.
Would you do that?
Ring fencing, I did that.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, ring fencing is a very valid approach. And you could say it's a thicket and some of the patents are very weak, but that's the way the game is played. So the more patents you have, the stronger your defensive position is in case you're attacked, for sure. Because your opposition now knows they have to knock out not just your primary patent, but all these other secondary patents that relate to the application of that primary patent. So it's a valid defensive position to take. And I did that in my company, absolutely.
Okay.
We did a lot of application type patents, not just on the core technology, but
Right.
application patents.
Right.
So that's the ring fencing part, to create the moat that prevents
Yes.
direct attack on everything else that you have.
Wonderful.
So for a small business, if you can afford the patents, I think that's a legitimate thing to do, and I would not change that system.
Yeah, I guess the larger, from a societal point of view,
Sure.
if we subtract off all of the expense, legal fees,
Sure.
opportunity costs of time involved
Sure.
in strategic maneuvering to protect our IP, somehow we have to subtract that from the benefits of the innovation that's induced by the IP. The net impact may be smaller than what an intro textbook on patenting would suggest.
Yeah.
The net societal impact may be smaller. So you're talking about, you could reduce the amount of, why 17 years, make it 10 years or 8 years, or why not 30 years? I mean, there's all kinds of things that you
It's arbitrary. It used to be 17 years from grant, and now it's 20 years from filing. So that's a differential of 3 years, which was the typical.
theory doesn't tell us what those numbers and what those starting points should be.
It's really hard to change because on an international basis, other countries would have to change as well. Yeah, you have to be pretty uniform globally to make the patent system really work.
What about countries like China, which de facto seem to be operating by a different set of rules?
Yeah, it's really hard to enforce anything in China.
Yeah.
It's really super hard. I mean, you can, but...
Right, but Chinese companies are still innovating, it seems like.
Sure. Yeah, they are. Of course, theft is legendary in China.
Yeah.
My company never had that problem with Chinese businesses, but it is supposed to happen quite a lot.
Did you license to Communist China?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, we never did.
So
No, did Korean and
Korean.
yeah,
So Pacific Rim.
Pacific Rim.
Okay.
Mostly they were American companies and some European companies.
Okay, great. Additional questions, Bradley?
No, thank you.
Yeah, we've been talking to Hal Philipp, maybe one of the greatest inventors of the 20th century. He's given us things such as the automatic door opener, the automatic faucet detector, and the technology that we use daily, which has included the touch screen that we all use. Really remarkable stuff, and we appreciate your time and your effort. And I've been joined by Bradley Norris, who's the Director of Technical Entrepreneurship at the Baylor Business School, and I think it's been a very fruitful time. And thanks for sharing your venture. I mean, it's just extraordinary. When are we going to see the movie? I think, don't you think his story would make a great movie? I really
Please.
do.
Who's going to play him in the movie?
Well, I've known Hal for a long time, so I want to be played by Ryan Gosling. So, so you need to arrange that. Who do you want to be played by?
I'm not interested, sorry.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. And so till we meet again, be of good cheer.
Thank you for having me, Bob.
Great,
Okay.
great.
Bradley.